You've probably seen those cryptic Facebook posts, the kind that mention spiritual battles, like, Satan stays busy, but you've got to let God take over when he moves. At a glance, it might sound like someone just trying to uplift others or share a little wisdom. But what if behind those words was a horrifying truth? What if the person typing that out had just taken a life, literally, with their victim's lifeless body still lying just a few feet away? Because that's exactly what was happening when 37-year-old Veanitta Lenon shared that post. At that very moment, the man she had been in a relationship with, 46-year-old Jason Bloomfield, was lying dead in their apartment, his body already beginning to decay while she went about her routine like nothing had happened. For nearly a week, she lived in that apartment with his corpse, sleeping, eating, scrolling, and even working her regular job as if her hands weren't stained with the worst kind of betrayal. She answered questions from neighbors with ease, even used Jason's car to run errands. But the charade came crashing down when Jason's teenage son stepped into that apartment and found the scene that would scar him forever. And when law enforcement arrived, Veanitta switched into full performance mode, crying on cue, looking distraught, trying to control the narrative with the kind of manipulation only someone who's done this before could pull off. This case makes you wonder just how well you know the people around you. If you've ever felt something was off about someone and it turned out you were right, you're not alone. This is one of those cases that makes your instincts matter more than ever. Jason Bloomfield wasn't a celebrity or some notorious figure. He was an ordinary man from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, just trying to live his life and stay afloat. Working hard at Burger King, clocking in reliably every single day, Jason had a strong work ethic that his coworkers respected. He was known for being dependable, a guy you could count on, and someone who took his responsibilities seriously. A huge Miami Dolphins fan, he supported his team regardless of their wins or losses. It was a small joy in his otherwise modest life. But above everything else, his son meant the world to him. Jason and his teenage boy were close, just like he was with his mother. They were a tight family unit, always in touch. When Jason missed a call, people noticed. And when he stopped showing up completely, alarms started to go off. He lived with Veanitta in an apartment they shared, and on the surface, they looked like any other couple. Sure, things weren't perfect. Money was tight, eviction was looming, and their relationship had its ups and downs, but no one thought it would ever come to violence. But on the evening of November 23, 2024, everything changed. Around dinnertime, residents of their apartment complex were jolted by a series of loud noises, 6 distinct gunshots echoing from Jason and Veanitta's unit. It wasn't just fireworks or a car backfiring. People knew what they heard, but they didn't know what it meant at the time. What they didn't realize was that Jason's life had ended right then, behind that closed door, and the person responsible was already plotting how to get away with it. The following morning brought immediate red flags. Jason, the always-on-time, never-miss-a-shift employee, didn't show up for work. No call, no message, no warning. His manager was puzzled at first, then deeply concerned. He started calling Jason's phone. Straight to voicemail. Tried again. Same thing. Hours passed, and still no word. This wasn't like him, not even close. Meanwhile, Jason's mother and son were also calling and texting, growing increasingly frantic as their attempts to reach him went unanswered. But while Jason's loved ones were spiraling into panic, Veanitta was busy crafting her cover stories. When people in the building asked about the noise from the night before, she was ready with a lie. She told them that a friend had come by and fired a gun nearby, making it sound like a completely unrelated incident. Her calm demeanor made it believable. To Jason's family, though, she told a different story. According to her, Jason had left her. She said they'd broken up because he was cheating with his ex, that he walked out, and that she hadn't seen him since. The implication was that he'd gone off somewhere in a rage, maybe with this other woman. But investigators would later find out that Jason never left. In fact, he hadn't even broken up with her. The truth was that they were still living together at the time of his death. What really happened in that apartment had nothing to do with cheating or love triangles. It was something darker. As the days passed, Jason's family became more desperate. His job remained unfilled, and the apartment stayed oddly quiet. No one was coming or going. The sounds of life inside had completely vanished. The truth began to unravel when Jason's son decided to go to the apartment himself. What he found there was beyond disturbing. His father's decomposing body was inside, a nightmare scene that no teenager should ever have to witness. Police were called, and Veanitta, who had been keeping up her lies for nearly a week, now had to face the authorities. But even then, she tried to sell a version of events with fake sobs and confused statements, trying to paint herself as shocked and devastated. But investigators weren't buying it. The physical evidence, the smell of decay, the inconsistencies in her story, it all pointed to something much more deliberate. As the investigation unfolded, more disturbing details about Veanitta began to surface. She wasn't some poor, overwhelmed woman who just snapped. This wasn't a moment of temporary insanity. Veanitta had a long criminal history that spanned years and multiple counties. Born in Detroit but having lived across different parts of Florida, she'd moved frequently, often leaving problems behind her. Her past was littered with arrests, court cases, and charges that painted a picture of someone very familiar with the legal system. Authorities described her as a habitual offender, not a first-timer. But you wouldn't know any of that if you'd seen her Facebook page. There, she painted herself as a God-fearing woman trying to live right, sharing motivational quotes, posts about family, faith, and even gratitude. It was the digital mask of someone who knew how to manipulate perception. And for a while it worked. The couple was drowning financially. Their eviction was just around the corner, and while Jason appeared to be looking for solutions, working, showing up, staying responsible, Veanitta seemed to be spiraling. There was no evidence Jason was actually cheating, as she had claimed to multiple people. That was a fabrication, a smokescreen to distract from her actions. What really led to that moment, the one where she picked up a gun and pulled the trigger 6 times, is still clouded in speculation. But what's clear is that it wasn't some heat-of-the-moment fight. It was the culmination of financial strain, toxic behavior, and perhaps something deeper rooted in her long-standing disregard for consequences. 6 days. That's how long she stayed in that apartment with Jason's body before anyone uncovered the truth. 6 days of pretending everything was fine, spinning lies, scrolling social media, posting about spiritual battles while hiding a real one she just fought, and won. Only, her victory came at the cost of a life. A son lost his father, a mother lost her child, and an entire community was left asking how someone could do something so brutal and keep it hidden so easily. The questions that remain are chilling. Was this premeditated? Did she plan to cover it up permanently? What would have happened if the son hadn't walked in when he did? Would she have gotten away with it longer? The combination was toxic. A career criminal facing eviction, living with a man she claimed was betraying her, all while pretending to be a woman of faith on social media. These weren't just red flags, they were warning sirens that nobody heard in time. And Jason Bloomfield was about to pay the ultimate price for missing those signs. November 29, 2024, 5 days had passed since those gunshots echoed through the apartment complex. 5 days of silence. 5 days of unanswered calls and growing panic from Jason's family. His 15-year-old son couldn't take it anymore. Neither could Jason's mother. They'd been calling, texting, and worrying themselves sick. Jason would never just disappear like this. Something was terribly wrong and they knew it. So, they decided to go to the apartment and check on him themselves. Picture this moment, a teenage boy and his grandmother walking up to an apartment door, probably arguing about who should knock first. They were worried, maybe even scared, but they had no idea they were about to walk into a nightmare that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They knocked. No answer. They called out Jason's name. Still nothing. Finally, they used their key to get inside. The smell hit them first. Anyone who's ever encountered death knows that smell. It's something you never forget, sweet, sickening, and absolutely unmistakable. But they probably didn't recognize it right away. Maybe they thought something had gone bad in the fridge or there was a plumbing problem. Then they found him. Jason Bloomfield's body was in a small bedroom, already in what police reports would later describe as advanced stages of decomposition. For 5 days in Florida's heat and humidity, his body had been rotting away while his killer went about her daily life. Imagine being that 15-year-old boy. Imagine walking into a room and finding your father's corpse bloated and decaying. Imagine the scream that probably tore from his throat. Imagine his grandmother trying to shield him from the sight while fumbling for her phone to call 911. The 911 call that came in that day was probably one of the most heartbreaking dispatchers had ever received. A family member finding their loved one dead is tragic enough. But finding them like this, after days of decomposition, after wondering where they were and why they weren't answering their phone, it's the kind of trauma that changes people forever. Within minutes, police cars and ambulances were racing toward the Fort Lauderdale apartment. Crime scene investigators were called in. The medical examiner was notified. What had started as a missing person case was now officially a homicide investigation. But here's what makes this story even more chilling. While Jason's son and mother were discovering his body and calling for help, Veanitta Lenon was out there somewhere, probably thinking she'd gotten away with murder. What's the most shocking true crime case from your area? Let us know in the comments because the story is about to get even more twisted. Just as police were securing the crime scene and trying to process what they were seeing, something incredible happened. Veanitta Lenon showed up. She pulled into the apartment complex parking lot, driving Jason's silver BMW. Think about that for a second. She was driving her dead boyfriend's car to the scene where his body had just been discovered. The audacity was breathtaking. But what happened next was even more shocking. As soon as Veanitta saw the police cars and ambulances, she immediately started crying, wailing, making a huge scene about how devastated she was to learn about Jason's death. There was just one problem. The police officer who watched her performance wrote something very specific in his report. He said, Veanitta was fake crying with no tears. She was making all the sounds of someone heartbroken, but her eyes were completely dry. This wasn't grief. This was acting, and it was terrible acting at that. The officer's trained eye caught what family members might have missed in their shock and pain. Veanitta was putting on a show, and she wasn't very good at it. Real grief doesn't look like a performance. Real tears don't turn on and off like a faucet. While Veanitta was busy with her fake crying routine, detectives were already starting to piece together what had really happened. They talked to the neighbors who'd heard those 6 gunshots on November 23rd. They spoke with Jason's manager at Burger King, who confirmed he'd never shown up for work after that date. Most importantly, they started looking at Veanitta's stories, and those stories were falling apart faster than she could tell them. Remember how she'd told neighbors that a friend had fired those gunshots nearby? Well, detectives checked. No reports of gunshots in the area that night, except from this apartment complex. No police calls about random shooting incidents. Her story was complete fiction. Then there was the story she'd told Jason's family about them breaking up because he was cheating. But if they'd broken up, why was she still living in the apartment? Why was she driving his car? Why hadn't anyone else heard about this breakup? The detectives weren't buying any of it. They'd seen enough crime scenes to know when someone was lying, and Veanitta's lies were so obvious, they were almost insulting. As they processed the scene, more evidence started piling up. The body had been moved. Jason hadn't died in that small bedroom where they found him. There were signs that someone had tried to clean up blood. A couch had been moved to block the bedroom door. This was calculated. Someone had killed Jason, moved his body, tried to clean up the evidence, and then went on with their life for 5 days while his corpse rotted away, and that someone was standing right in front of them, fake crying without a single real tear. As detectives dug deeper into the case, Veanitta's web of lies started unraveling like a cheap sweater. Every story she'd told, every excuse she'd made, every tear she'd faked, it was all about to come crashing down. The first breakthrough came from technology. In today's world, your phone tells a story whether you want it to or not. Detectives pulled Veanitta's cell phone records and GPS data. And what they found was damning. Her phone showed she'd been at the apartment on November 23rd when those gunshots were fired, not nearby, not visiting a friend. She was right there when Jason died. The GPS coordinates placed her exactly where the murder happened at exactly the time it happened. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. Detectives discovered that after Jason was dead, Veanitta had been using his phone. She'd accessed his bank account and made Zelle transfers. Think about how cold that is. Your boyfriend is lying dead in the next room, and you're stealing his money. This wasn't some desperate woman grabbing cash to run away. The transfers happened over several days. She was methodically draining Jason's accounts while his body decomposed, just feet away from where she slept. The crime scene reconstruction painted an even more horrifying picture. Jason hadn't died in that small bedroom where his family found him. The blood evidence showed he'd been shot in the living room, probably while he was just sitting there, maybe watching TV or eating dinner. 6 gunshots. That's not someone who panicked and fired once. That's not self-defense. That's execution. Veanitta had emptied her gun into Jason, making sure he was dead. But then came the part that showed just how calculated this murder was. After shooting Jason 6 times in the living room, Veanitta had dragged his body into the small bedroom. A 4'11" woman dragging a grown man's dead weight across an apartment floor. Can you imagine that scene? The blood trail, the effort it took, the complete lack of emotion required to grab your boyfriend's corpse and drag it like a piece of furniture. Detectives weren't working off hunches, they had concrete proof. In the apartment's living room, there was blood splattered across surfaces, drag marks staining the floor, and failed attempts to clean it all up. The cleanup had clearly been rushed, careless even. But what chilled investigators to their core was what they found on the phones. While Jason Bloomfield's family was frantically trying to reach him, calling, texting, pleading for any sign of life, Veanitta Lenon was there, reading those desperate messages in real time. She watched his mother's panic unfold. She saw every text his 15-year-old son sent, asking where his dad was. And she said nothing. For 5 straight days she stayed silent, knowing full well where Jason was and what had become of him. And during those 5 days, Veanitta didn't hide away. GPS data showed she came and went as she pleased. She went to work, ran errands, even took joyrides in Jason's car. All while his decomposing body lay hidden in the very apartment they once shared. But one of the darkest details, perhaps the most disturbing, was a Facebook post she made during that time. You remember that cryptic line about Satan being busy and leaving things to God? That wasn't some harmless quote. She wrote it while Jason's corpse was rotting just feet away. That post wasn't an expression of faith, it was a mask worn over horror. While portraying herself as a woman of spiritual insight, she was living with the consequences of a monstrous act. Her lies were unraveling quickly, every cover story crumbling. The growing mountain of evidence made one thing abundantly clear: Veanitta Lenon had executed Jason in cold blood, then lived with his corpse, drained his money, and spun a twisted web of deception to everyone who loved him. But pulling the trigger was just the beginning of her crimes. What she did next revealed the chilling depth of her calculation. After shooting Jason, Veanitta dragged his body into the apartment's small bedroom. Then she got to work, cleaning. Armed with bleach, Clorox, rags, and a mop, she scrubbed his blood like it was just another mess to erase. Try to picture that scene. A woman on her knees, methodically wiping away the last traces of the man she murdered. The acrid sting of bleach mixing with the unmistakable odor of death. She wasn't acting in panic. This was cold, deliberate. She was trying to erase the truth. But blood has a way of telling its story. It soaks deep, settles into cracks, and lingers even when you think it's gone. Cleaning blood isn't like it looks in movies, there's always residue. And forensic teams are trained to find it. After the cleanup, Veanitta dragged a couch in front of the bedroom door where Jason's body lay. It was a calculated move, her attempt to keep anyone from stumbling onto the scene. This wasn't the work of someone breaking down emotionally. This was someone planning ahead. But she miscalculated one thing: how much Jason's family cared. They refused to buy her stories, and they weren't going to disappear. It was that devotion that ultimately unraveled her scheme. The case didn't wrap up overnight. Detectives spent months collecting every shred of evidence, connecting her lies, mapping her movements, analyzing phone data, and uncovering every inconsistency. Eventually, it all pointed back to Veanitta. Then, on May 2, 2025, it all caught up to her. A Fort Lauderdale patrol officer spotted her, recognized the face from the outstanding warrant, and arrested her on the spot. After months of walking free, her run was over. But law enforcement wasn't just charging her with one murder. Once they dug into her past, they uncovered a long-standing pattern. On May 5th, prosecutors filed a career criminal felony case. Jason's killing wasn't some isolated moment of rage, it was the final chapter in a lifetime of criminal behavior. She wasn't just someone who made a bad decision under pressure. She was someone who had turned deception and lawbreaking into a lifestyle, and now the law was ready to confront it head-on. The charges she faced were nothing short of grave: first-degree murder using a firearm and fraud, specifically, unlawfully using personal information of a deceased individual. That second charge stemmed from her looting Jason's accounts and stealing from the man she had just murdered. Then came May 28th, the day of her arraignment. Standing before a judge, Veanitta had an opportunity, however faint, to admit what she'd done, to show remorse, to acknowledge the pain she'd caused Jason's family. Instead, she chose denial. She entered a plea of not guilty on all counts. Even in the face of overwhelming, meticulously documented evidence, she clung to the role of the wronged party, trying to twist the system to her advantage. But the court wasn't convinced. Her bond was denied. She was remanded to the Paul Ryan Detention Facility in Pompano Beach, where she remains, awaiting trial and still refusing to take responsibility. The truth is, Veanitta's long record should have been a blaring alarm long before Jason was ever in the picture. She wasn't some former offender trying to live right. She was someone who had been in and out of the system, a chronic rule breaker. Most people don't just leap from petty crimes to murder overnight, but things do spiral when someone with a past feels cornered. Neighbors heard those 6 gunshots, shots that tore through the night, but none of them picked up the phone to report it. Maybe they assumed it was fireworks. Maybe they were afraid. But in times like these, hesitation costs lives. If you hear repeated gunfire, don't guess, call the police. Let professionals decide what's going on. Jason's coworkers and family did all the right things. When he didn't show up, they noticed. They made calls, they pushed for answers. But one can't help but wonder, what if someone had noticed the warning signs earlier? Veanitta was unraveling. She was desperate. She was spinning conflicting stories. These are red flags, blinking, blaring signs that something's wrong. Financial pressure, criminal history, social media behavior that doesn't match reality, these are clues. Pay attention. Jason Bloomfield should still be with us, clocking in for shifts at Burger King, catching Dolphins games, sharing quiet moments with his son. But his life was taken by someone who valued her own comfort more than his future. This story serves as a brutal reminder that evil often wears a mask of normalcy. That someone can post Bible verses by day and clean blood by night. That financial stress, when mixed with the wrong personality, can become lethal. And it reminds us that looking the other way, ignoring inconsistencies, excusing bad behavior, can end in tragedy. Jason's son, just 15 years old, will forever carry the nightmare of discovering his father's remains. His grandmother will never forget the stench, the horror, the heartbreak that shattered their lives. Veanitta didn't just kill a man, she devastated a family. But we can honor Jason by staying vigilant, by recognizing danger signs before it's too late. If you're in a relationship where stress is mounting and your partner's behavior shifts dangerously, seek help. If someone's past keeps catching up to their present, don't brush it off. If their stories keep changing, dig deeper. If you're a neighbor who hears something strange, speak up. If you're a coworker who notices an unexplained absence, take it seriously. If you're a family member receiving suspicious explanations, trust your gut. Jason's death was preventable. And while we can't bring him back, we can learn from this tragedy. If this story impacted you, please like, share, and subscribe to True Crimes Venue. Explore our carefully selected playlists for more stories that don't just expose the dark side of humanity, but aim to protect others from similar danger. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.